And until lately, I felt I had my life under control. I've always been a simple guy, no big dreams, no crazy drama. I had a regular career as a software developer, a decent house in a quiet neighborhood, and until recently, I believed I had a strong marriage with a woman I truly loved. Laura and I met almost 8 years ago. Looking back, it seems like a lifetime ago. I was 23, fresh out of college, working my first job, and frankly naive about life. She was 22, working as an assistant at a marketing agency while trying to figure out her own career path. For the record, she never did, and eventually became a stay-at-home wife. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue, one of those casual backyard gatherings when everyone is using cheap paper plates and someone is always burning the burgers. And double-check the gas tank before we hit the road. It seemed to work, we balanced each other out. She brought excitement into my life. Laura was generally in the kitchen or on the couch, browsing through her phone. She would tell me stories from her day. She worked in marketing at the time. Laura wasn't in a rush, and neither was I. We both preferred to wait until we were more financially stable and prepared for the next major step. We seemed to agree on the majority of issues. We had date nights, which usually consisted of supper at one of our favorite restaurants or a movie, but I believe I stopped noticing the small details, like how Laura seemed to thrive on attention. It wasn't too horrible, at least not at first. She's the type of person that can brighten a room, and people instinctively draw towards her. I guess I began to take her vitality and warmth for granted, expecting they were a continuous part of our lives together. At the moment, I wasn't concerned. I assumed we were solid. Sure. We had disagreements now and then. What marriage doesn't? Most of the time, it was about little matters, such as me forgetting to take out the garbage or her leaving her shoes scattered throughout the home. Nothing significant. But there's this issue about relationships. They can appear fine on the outside while cracks occur quietly underneath. If you don't pay attention, those cracks might expand and cause the entire foundation to crumble. I didn't see it coming, making him younger than the majority of the residents in the neighborhood. He was a personal trainer, fit, confident, and admittedly, a little too attractive for his own good. He had the type of body that made people look twice, as if he had just stepped out of an action film. Jake was easy to notice from the moment he moved in, not just because of his appearance, but because he was always outside doing something, washing his car, mowing the lawn, erecting a pull-up bar in his yard. There was always a reason for him to go shirtless. He quickly became the buzz of the neighborhood. Laura spotted him right away. How could she not? We first met Jake when he came over to introduce himself while we were in the yard one Saturday morning. He was pleasant, the type of person who could charm anyone. Laura started up a discussion with him almost immediately, asking where he was from, what he did for a living, and how he liked the neighborhood. I recall standing there, smiling and nodding, barely able to say anything while the two of them chatted like old friends. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Laura was outgoing, she spoke to everyone. She'd be just as chatty with the mailman or the guy at the hardware store. It never seemed to me that there was anything unusual about her interest in Jake. But looking back, I can see the subtle alterations that occurred after that. It started with casual talks. Laura always found a cause to join Jake outside. At first, it was small tasks like getting the mail, watering the plants, and putting out the trash. However, these brief jobs invariably led to 10 or 15-minute conversations with Jake. I once arrived home from work and discovered them conversing in the driveway. Laura was holding a basket of laundry that she had been carrying to the garage, and Jake was lounging casually against his car, laughing at something she said. When I stepped up, they both turned to me, and Laura pretended it was no big deal. I didn't think much of it until I noticed her heading across the yard, a dish of cookies in hand. Just being neighborly, she remarked when I asked her about it. I shrugged it off. Laura's behavior in this regard was not unique. She had previously brought brownies to other neighbors. She said she was thinking about starting to jog again, to get back into shape, she explained. I did not question it. Laura had previously gone through fitness phases in which she would become thrilled about working out for a month or two before losing interest. But this time, Laura determined her new jogging program would begin at the same time Jake was out there. I noticed them speaking on the sidewalk one morning as I was going for work. Laura was stretching, and Jake was showing her a way to avoid shin splints. I didn't say anything, just a short wave, and drove away, but something in the scene stuck with me. Around this time, she would swiftly lock her screen or flip her phone over, as if she didn't want me to see anything. One night I observed her scrolling through Instagram, and when I looked over, I was just checking out his fitness posts, she told me. He has some good workout advice. I wanted to believe her, so I let it go, but the small things kept stacking up. Another day, I was working in the garage and heard laughter coming from the backyard. I stepped outside to see Laura and Jake standing near the fence, laughing about something. Laura was holding an iced tea, and Jake was waving animatedly while telling a story. Laura waved at me as if nothing unusual had occurred. Jake was just telling me about this funny thing that happened at his gym, she explained later when I questioned about it. It was beginning to feel uncomfortable. I don't want to sound paranoid, but you can know when something is wrong. Laura's conversation about Jake had a new energy to it. She'd casually mention things he'd said or done, such as, Jake's thinking about getting a dog, or Jake recommended this great protein shake. It was subtle, but once you notice it, you can't ignore it. At this moment, I had yet to say anything. Part of me refused to think there was anything to worry about. Laura was someone I trusted. But I began to pay closer attention. If something was happening, I had to witness it for myself. It was a Saturday morning, and I remember it vividly because it began hand-off, so typical. She enjoyed her slow mornings, particularly on weekends. The house was silent, with only the humming of the coffee machine in the background, and for a brief minute, I felt peaceful. She nodded hastily before shaking her head. Actually, no, she responded with a big sigh. We need to talk. Anyone who has been in a relationship understands that those 4 words rarely mean anything good. My stomach nodded, but I tried to keep it cool. All right, I murmured, reclining in my chair. What's going on? Laura paused, her gaze flitting around the room as if she was looking for the proper words. Finally, she looked at me and said, I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to say it. I think I have feelings for Jake. For a moment, I believed I had misheard her. What? I asked, leaning forward as if being closer would make the words more clear. She bit her lip, appearing really uncomfortable. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said hurriedly, as if she wanted to avoid the response. It just happened. I've been spending time with Jake, and I feel this connection, and now I'm confused. Confused? That word struck me more than anything else. She did not just express her guilt or admit that she had made a mistake. She expressed her confusion, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle. I stared at her, trying to understand what she was saying. My thoughts raced. Did she mention she wanted to leave? And I need to figure out what these feelings mean. I felt as if the floor had been torn out from beneath me. We'd been together for years, had established a life together. And now she said she wasn't sure she wanted to be with me anymore. It was surreal. I took a deep breath and tried to hold my voice steady. So what are you saying? You want to take a break? She hesitated, and then nodded. Kind of, she responded. I need time to figure things out. But I don't want to throw away what we have without being sure. I don't want to live with regrets. Regrets? The phrase lingered in my head like a splinter. She was talking about regrets as if she was the one putting everything on the line, as if my feelings were secondary to her life-changing decisions. I sat there, staring at her. I just think it's the best way to figure out where my heart is, she admitted cautiously. Sure, I replied. Do what you need to do. Inside. I was already finished when she mentioned she wanted to spend a month with another man. My brain flicked a switch, but I didn't want to show my cards yet. If she was willing to abandon our marriage for a dream with a neighbor, I was curious to see how far she would go. Laura let out a relieved sigh as if she had just been given permission to accomplish something heroic. Thank you, she replied, reaching across the table to touch my hand. If that's what you need. She said nothing after that, simply sat there, most likely contemplating the fact that I wasn't arguing or fighting. But within, I was already planning. Laura spent the following few days packing a modest bag. She informed me she'd be staying with Jake, and she made it sound casual, as if it was simply a temporary arrangement. She didn't appear to realize that I wasn't asking inquiries or expressing any resistance. When Laura left, the house felt different, not empty, but quieter. And stood there trying to figure out what had just happened. My wife, whom I had been with for years and expected to spend my life with, had departed to figure things out with the guy next door. I considered relocating them but ultimately chose to leave them where they were, not because I missed her, but because I didn't want to waste energy. I poured myself into work, taking on extra assignments to fill my schedule. I stayed late at work, not because I had to, but because I didn't want to return home to an empty house. When I wasn't working, I went to the gym frequently. I had never been a regular gym-goer before, but there was something fulfilling about pushing myself physically, as if I could sweat out all of my stress. Friends began to realize that something was amiss. A few of them inquired as to why Laura was not present, and I responded vaguely. She's staying with a friend for a while, I explained. There was a prolonged delay on the other end of the call. Then he added, Well, son, I hate to say it, but it sounds like you're better off without her. At first, I wasn't sure what to reply. So certain in our future, but now it simply felt like a reminder of all that had gone wrong. By the end of the week, I had made my decision. I was not going to sit around and wait for Laura to make her big decision. I was planning to make my own. The next day, I called a divorce attorney. Sitting in that lawyer's office felt weird. I detailed the scenario, attempting to maintain a steady voice, even though a part of me still couldn't believe it was true. The lawyer listened intently, nodding as I spoke, and when I finished, irreconcilable differences. This is what we would become. Laura and I weren't on the same page anymore, and perhaps we never had been. The lawyer guided me through the process. I began taking little efforts to prepare for the inevitable. I transferred some money to a second account in case things became ugly later. I walked through the house and began mentally partitioning what was mine and what was hers. I didn't touch her belongings yet. I figured I'd wait until things were official, but in my head, I was already planning how the house would look without her. The days stretched into weeks, and I grew accustomed to the stillness. It wasn't as horrible as I expected. In fact, it felt really tranquil. I didn't have to deal with her continual chatter or the minor disagreements over trivial matters, like whose turn it was to do the dishes. Meanwhile, as if nothing bothered me, but inside, I was filled with rage and pity. Anger because she had thrown away everything we owned for a fling with a boy who was unlikely to stick around. Pity because I knew it wouldn't go well for her. Jake did not strike me as the sort to settle down, and Laura was about to find out the hard way. By the third week, I didn't need those memories. Laura decided to make her spectacular reappearance, almost exactly a month ago today. I had not heard anything from her during her brief trial with Jake. It was as if she had already dismissed me as Plan B. By this point, I had ceased caring. I wasn't waiting by the door for her to come to her senses. I wasn't pacing the house wondering what she and Jake were doing. I had filed for divorce, and my lawyer had already begun drafting the paperwork. As far as I was concerned, the marriage was ended. and a confident expression on her face as if she just returned from a trip and was expecting me to roll out the red carpet. "Hey," she said, placing her luggage by the door. "I'm back." I was sitting on the couch, scrolling between channels and scarcely looking up. "Welcome back," I murmured, my tone remaining neutral. She paused as if she was anticipating more of a response. I replied, crossing my arms. "Talk." Laura smiled, the kind of smile she used when she was trying to make things better. "I've done a lot of thinking," she told me. And I had to bite my tongue to stop giggling at how casually she mentioned him. But I realized he's not what I need. He's fun, sure, but he's immature. He doesn't have the stability that you have. And I think I was just caught up in the excitement of it all. There it was, her big revelation. She tried out the shiny new toy and decided she liked the old one more. I replied. "We've been through so much together, Mike. We have history. That's not something you just throw away." I let her continue. I let her unload all of her perfectly practiced phrases about love, forgiveness, and beginning over. When she finished talking, I rose up and walked over to the kitchen counter. I unlocked a drawer, pulled out the divorce papers my lawyer had sent over, releasing a frightened laugh. "No," I replied, leaning against the counter, arms folded. "I'm not kidding." For a time, she stared at the papers as if she couldn't believe what she saw. Then she glanced up at me with big eyes. "You're divorcing me?" "Yeah," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not interested in being your second choice, Laura." "Do you honestly think I'm just going to take you back like nothing happened?" Laura opened her mouth to argue before closing it again, her face growing red. "It's not like that," she responded, her voice quivering. "I was trying to do the right thing. I didn't want to stay and resent you. I thought," she trailed off, her gaze darting across the room, "you thought you could have it both ways." "Or should we move forward?" "Move forward," I instructed without hesitation. It wasn't easy standing up to Laura, but it was ultimately the correct thing to do. Laura was not the sort to simply walk away from a confrontation, especially one in which she thought she was losing. I'd hardly sat down when my phone buzzed with a text from her. "This isn't over." The following several days were eventful, to say the least. Laura arrived unannounced the next evening, beating on the door as if she were attempting to break it down. "Mike, open the door!" she exclaimed. I opened it, keeping a bland attitude. "What do you want, Laura?" She rushed by me and stormed into the living room as if she still lived there. "We need to talk," she stated, pacing back and forth. "You can't just file for divorce without giving me a chance to fix things." I leaned against the door frame and crossed my arms. "You had your chance," I replied quietly. "You made your decision when you left." "That's not fair," she responded, her voice rising. "I didn't leave to end our marriage. I left to figure things out." Her voice shaking. "I didn't know what I wanted, but I know now. I want us, Mike. I want to fix this." "Too late," I replied, my tone strong. "You chose to prioritize your feelings for him over our marriage, and then you chose to leave. Those weren't accidents, they were decisions." She opened her lips to argue but then stopped, her shoulders sagging. For the first time, she appeared defeated. "What am I supposed to do now?" she inquired quietly. I sighed, feeling pity for her despite everything she had done. "That's not my problem anymore," I explained. "You made your choices, now you have to live with them." She waited for another minute, looking as if she wanted to say anything else. But then she walked out without saying anything. Following that, the divorce proceedings went fast. Laura attempted to drag things out at first, perhaps expecting I would change my mind. When I told him about the scenario, he let out a low whistle. "She's got some nerve," he commented. "But I'm proud of you, son. Standing your ground isn't easy, but it's the right thing to do." Laura's stalling tactics proved ineffective. My lawyer was sharp, and the proof of her leaving for Jake made things quite clear. She attempted to plead for spousal support, as if she hadn't slept in days. Her lawyer handed her a pen, and for a brief minute, I assumed she was not going to sign, but eventually, she scribbled her name at the bottom of the sheet. Hoping to recognize the person I'd fallen in love with all those years ago, but all I saw was someone I used to know. "I know you are," I replied. "But sorry doesn't fix this." I'd occasionally hear tidbits about Laura through the grapevine. Jake obviously moved on to someone else shortly after she returned to me. According to one common friend, she was currently living with a relative and figuring out her next moves. I didn't feel satisfied hearing about her problems, but I also didn't feel sorry for her. She had made her decisions, and now she was dealing with the consequences. One day, I ran into her at the supermarket. We locked eyes briefly, and I could see remorse written all over her face. She gave me a little hesitant wave, but I simply nodded and moved past. There was nothing more to say. Looking back, I don't regret how I handled situations. Laura believed she could have it both ways. She could go pursue her feelings for someone else, then return to me if it didn't work out. But life does not operate that way. But it was a wake-up call I didn't realize I needed. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. My boyfriend dumped me over red flags his best friend made up. And most of his ex-girlfriends were flings that lasted only 3 or 4 months. Naturally, I loved to believe that this relationship was meaningful for him, but a few days ago, I discovered that may not be the case. Eric's best buddy, Olivia, 24F, has been his neighbor for more than 14 years. They met when they were 10 years old, and have remained inseparable since. I believe this explains why his previous relationships failed. Eric only told me about this 4 months into our relationship, stating he believed it was time. I had already become strongly attached to him, so I chose to stay. Yes, I understand, bad decision. If I had known about his unusual need for Olivia sooner, I would not have gone on a first date with him. My relationship with Olivia wasn't terrible, at least not until recently. Olivia and I met numerous times, and while we were polite, so I told him it was only a stomach illness and he would be okay. But even so, he appeared reluctant. I asked him what was going on, and he said he was going to watch a movie and then have lunch with Olivia. He was unsure whether he'd be able to make it. I was already sick and not feeling well, and told him he should date Olivia instead, then hung up. I didn't answer any of his calls after that. An hour later, Eric arrived and apologized for what he did. I was relieved when he arrived because, honestly, if he hadn't, I would have ended our relationship. He informed me that he had canceled his arrangements with Olivia and even brought me homemade soup that day. I felt really positive about him. We spent the day together, and by the time he left that night, I was feeling much better. But I had no idea my actions would have ramifications. Eric stopped contacting me the very following day. No calls or texts for the entire day. I panicked a little, thinking something horrible had happened to him. I tried to contact him throughout the day, but had no luck. At approximately midnight, he called me back. He talked in an entirely different tone, serious, even upset. After inquiring if I felt better, he suggested I sit down. Then, he broke up with me. At first. But he had finally understood that my conduct was nothing but a bunch of red flags and that he couldn't stay with me any longer. I was completely confused. As far as I was concerned, I had not done or said anything to him that would have raised a red flag, at least not knowingly. I had always strived to be a decent person and a good girlfriend. This was a major shock for me. I didn't know what to say, so I remained silent as he informed me he couldn't be with me anymore. Then, he hung up. The suddenness of it all, I was astounded. We had just had such a nice time together the day before, and now he was telling us we were overdue for red flags. It didn't make sense. I ended up weeping myself to sleep that night because I couldn't contact or text him for help. After we broke up, he blocked me everywhere. There was no way for me to receive closure or an explanation. Eric didn't even have the decency to break up with me in person, despite how long we'd been dating. I kept repeating our last few exchanges in my thoughts, trying to figure out what had prompted him to suggest that I had a lot of red flags, but I couldn't come up with anything. I was taken aback because I hadn't expected it. I had just started to digest our separation, so it felt quite sudden. I answered the phone, and he immediately began apologizing. Apparently, she disliked the fact that I forced him to cancel plans with her, and convinced him that it was a red sign. She even brought up a few of the other seemingly innocuous things I do, depicting me as a giant red flag. Eric said he had fallen for it. Olivia, he claimed, had fed him a series of lies, alleging that I was attempting to build a rift between them and that this was a warning sign. She also distorted things. I couldn't believe anyone would fall for such rubbish, let alone break up over it. But Eric was probably an idiot. He then apologized for everything and begged me to accept him back, believing it was my responsibility. But now I see that was all Olivia's doing, and she was most likely fine with it. I should have expected her to try anything to get back at me. After all, I had stolen Eric from right beneath her nose. When I was sick, his decision to care for me and cancel our plans must have made her perceive me as a competitor. She couldn't have it. So she made sure we broke up. Everything suddenly made clear. Eric was pleading with me over the phone, imploring me to accept him back. He even had the arrogance to say that Olivia would no longer be a problem because he would keep our connection a secret from her. I was appalled. Even after all had transpired, he couldn't realize how much Olivia was in charge of his life. If he had broken up with me for another reason, I might have considered taking him back. But I couldn't believe he ditched me over something Olivia had said, without considering for himself. Eric was clearly an imbecile. Whether or not he kept our relationship covert, Olivia would maintain control over him, and he would continue to do anything she wanted, like a puppet. I had already made up my mind the moment he revealed the true reason for the breakup. I'd tried enough for this person, and he didn't deserve it. I told my boyfriend that I would only get back with him if he notified Olivia about his decision and confronted her for controlling his life. He'd have to inform her that she wasn't his employer, and that he'd be getting back with me regardless of her. Only if he did that would I contemplate getting back together. Because if Olivia humiliated me, I would undoubtedly reciprocate the favor. When I told Eric what I wanted him to do, he was horrified and tried to persuade me to reconsider, stating it was excessive and unneeded. He protested for a long time, trying to get out of it, but I was determined. I informed him that I would only respond if he texted her what I had asked. Otherwise, he may say farewell and remain broken up. After a few more minutes of fighting, Eric finally gave in. He sent Olivia those texts, and even provided me with a screenshot as proof. I instantly hung up and blocked him. I knew it was petty and cruel, but I couldn't help it. I'd been upset over the past 3 days about our breakup, and this was the least I could do to feel some sense of justice. Am I the asshole for forcing Eric to send Olivia those texts? Especially since I had no intention of responding in the first place? Update 1. It's been 2 days since I spoke with Eric, and he hasn't been able to reach me since. Olivia is unable to contact me since I have also blocked her. I initially felt awful about what I forced Eric to do, but after reading the replies below, I realized I don't have a good reason to feel that way. Eric had a choice, and he chose to send Olivia those texts because he wanted to be with me rather than her. It's not like I held him at gunpoint. He did exactly what he desired. Yes, lying to him about getting back together was wrong. I accept it. I had no answers and started overthinking what I'd done, which just made me more puzzled. So forgive me if I don't feel too awful about what I did. I haven't told anyone about my breakup with Eric yet, but I assume I'll have to start shortly. Only a few hours earlier, one of my friends invited Eric and me to her birthday celebration. When I arrive without him, I will have to explain his absence. I'm dreading that part because I'm not sure what I'll say when people ask why we broke up, especially since we were happy on the surface. I received a call from a number I did not know. Naturally, I let it ring the first time, but when they called again, I responded. It was Olivia on the phone. As soon as I heard her voice, I was prepared to hang up because I had absolutely no desire to chat with her. But then she warned that if I hung up, it would only reveal that I was a coward and frightened to confront her. I should not have let it affect me, but it did, so I stayed on the call. Olivia then went on to say terrible things about me right in front of my face. She called me a variety of names for what I'd done, including a sneaky little liar, and expressed her belief that Eric and I had split up since he was too good for me. Then she called me the B word, which really irritated me, and I snapped. I told her just what I thought of her. I informed her that she could scream at me all she wanted, but Eric had the option not to send her those texts. It was his decision, and he chose me over her. That was the final straw. On the other end, I could hear her start crying. I didn't feel sorry for her because she'd called to make me feel awful, but here she was crying. I'd love to put both of them in their place and remind them that I'm not someone they can mess with and get away with it. They aren't the only ones who have the right to damage others' sentiments. The person who introduced us was hosting a party, and we were both invited. She was unaware that Eric and I had ended our relationship. Eric entered the party about an hour in, accompanied by Olivia. They both appeared ready to battle. I drew my friend aside and recounted the entire issue to her. I even offered to depart early in case things went wrong. While I wanted to cause a spectacle, she admitted that she wouldn't mind if we confronted one another at the party because she wanted to see the drama play out in person, especially after what I told her. I had the decency to ignore Eric and Olivia since, if anyone was going to start a fight, it had to be them. I was classier than that. But when it came to teaching them their place, even bringing up the phone call from a few days ago, he said I was mistaken about Olivia being the backup since, in fact, I was the backup and not worth dating. I laughed in his face since now it was my chance to reveal him and his loving BFF for who they really were. I told him that both he and Olivia were much below my level. He should have counted himself lucky that he could persuade me to date him in the first place. As far as I was concerned, he was Olivia's spineless puppet, and no other woman would want him. At the very least, I was willing to give him a chance, but he blew that as well. Furthermore, indicating how essential I was to her. Honestly, her act betrayed her insecurity and pitiful nature. They were an ideal complement for one another. I genuinely hoped they got together because no one should have to cope with individuals like them. By then, the party had come to a halt. Everyone stared at us silently. Eric had nothing to say and simply stared at me. Olivia, without a clear response, began flinging expletives at me. She got up in my personal space. They obviously did not want to be any more ashamed than they already were. Once again, their pitiful little attempt to humiliate me had failed. Eric had to literally drag Olivia away because she refused to accept defeat. After they went, my friend approached me, told me how awesome I was, and we all laughed about what occurred. Here's a little update. I just found out that Olivia and Eric are finally together. LOL, it's been 3 months since our little altercation at the party, and I guess they recognized I was correct. No other reasonable person would put up with them separately, so they chose to date each other instead. I heard this from a friend of a friend as I no longer communicate with any of them. As for me, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.